Wham. Bam. Look at us.
There we are.
Live and in living color once again.
Oh yeah.
Weren't
Back
live
with a banger of a
last.
topic today too.
Yeah, we weren't live last week just because, life finds a
Mm.
way. But I should have a good, yeah, like you said, I should have a good topic today. A lot of a lot of ideas were pitched to us from the last one. But this one definitely stuck the most to me personally. Uh, but before we start with that, I want to show something that YouTube randomly recommended to me, and it's Yu-Gi-Oh related. If it wasn't Yu-Gi-Oh related, I wouldn't bother. Let's do screen only. So is this like video? Um,
Ooh.
of course you'll see in the on the stream as you're watching on the side. But this guy, like this Japanese YouTuber, he makes like these wood carvings of Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
It's so cool.
And yeah, and like he's doing the back of one, and it's just like each individual little piece. I love all these like
I feel like
arts and crafty stuff, and it's like it's wild.
and for every piece that he does, he probably has to do the back like all over again. It
Yeah,
seems like that's probably a really labor intensive part of this too.
it's probably took
So
him many days to do. I'm like
no,
just getting the individual pieces of wood.
that's so cool.
I mean, yeah, it's like
It
this.
reminds me, I've seen people like extend Yu-Gi-Oh card art to like full art,
Oh, I seen that.
sort of.
Yeah, they like have like the
Yeah,
stacks.
yeah. So it reminds me a lot of that
Like, look at this. This is like he
level
probably
of
didn't even need to
detail.
do the back, but he's like, I'm gonna do like the entire. Oh yeah, he has like a laser thing. Gets a block of wood and
Oh,
he.
that's really cool.
Oh, how? Whoa!
Doing laser cut.
What the heck? Oh my god, that is. Yeah, these like very. He probably has like a program in his computer where he like puts the measurements in and everything, and like he's doing like the stars individually. This
So
is.
cool.
I wish I
I
was
think that
half as talented as this lad.
yeah.
What
I
is
mean, it's
that?
just like I I've never been someone who can work with my hands. Like I'm not a handy guy. So whenever I see someone able to do things with like this level of precision and detail, it's just like that's so impressive.
Like I'm sure this is the kind of thing where it took him or her, I assume it's a guy just based off the hands, it took them like a very long time to just get to this level of craftsmanship and this meticulous skill. Like I'm sure this is like a years and possibly decades of experience. Like you can't just jump into making a Slifer the Sky Dragon out of wood.
Yeah, and if you do, I think you've got a career in this ready to go because that's like a level of virtuosic mastery,
He just puts it. It's so
So
clean.
cool.
It's like everything is just like meant to be there. It is. Oh,
What's the name of
gorgeous.
this channel?
Um, it's something tears. I'll have to.
Oh, it's like in Japanese characters.
Yeah, I'll post it in chat here. Yeah, it's while he has one of like blue eyes and red eyes, and yeah,
So cool.
it's super wild. But I just wanted to show that off, because I thought it was pretty neat. And where
Yeah,
else
no,
am I
I
gonna talk
agree.
about it?
Yeah, that's why we
Aside,
have a podcast, right?
exactly, just ease into things. I'm sure people are like, "Oh, talk about video games." We'll
Yeah.
get to it. We'll get to
Yeah,
it. I
I,
swear.
I thought the topic today was, wood cutting and Yu-Gi-Oh, the intersection of the two, and going into a deep dive there. Is that not what we're talking about with wood cutting?
Woodcut.
Darn.
I'm actually a real big fan of ukiyo-e, like
Oh
Japanese
yeah,
art. Like I follow this one guy, David Bull. He lives in Japan and he's been doing it for like a long time. And he'll occasionally post updates or do like live streams on Twitch. And he's very soft spoken. He's this like 70-year-old skinny guy, and it's very pleasant. And he talks about like the wood
Yeah.
carving, and he like shows little details of like old works and stuff. And yeah, it's insane. Just
I think
like
that's one of the
like
nice.
what because like wood carving is just like it's so different, right? Than like drawing with a pen or clay sculpting.
Yeah, I feel like it also takes like a art skills in like a different direction as well.
Hmm.
Um, because like it's one thing to put art onto a canvas, right? Like you're not really doing anything to the canvas itself, but you're putting it on it, like layering
Hmm.
it on, painting it or drawing or whatever you're doing to it. But it's another thing to take a thing of wood and basically build out of that, right? Like go into the medium that you're doing and like chip away things, cut out things, and do things like that. And then it all sort of combined into what this guy was doing, where he did that already to multiple pieces of wood, and he's sort of putting them together into one
Hmm.
piece.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
such
it's
a
just very cool.
like it's already a very hard and like physical object, right? Like it's this is organic the right term?
Yeah, organic would work.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, it's already so like fragile and specific with all because it's wood, right?
yeah,
And just take something like that, and like even the fact that we can have this technology that you can, and this kind of relates to like 3D printing as well, but it can just shoot these lasers, create this thing, which you know is part like it's not all the work. There's still so much like human element in it, but
yeah. No, it's very cool. And like for those cutting things, I think you do have to like program it in. I had a friend in college who majored in architecture, and I actually she was like building a model of something, and I actually went to the lab she was working in and saw that sort of machine go like saw her enter in what she needed to enter in and then have it do that thing. And it's really wild to watch in person, like you see
mm,
it doing it. It's just like sort of hypnotic. Um, yeah, it's a
yeah,
cool intersection of technology and art.
yeah, and yeah, I think another intersection of that aspect, you know, like yeah, there's like wood cutting and stuff like that, but then you start talking about like going like the digital realm and like coding and all this stuff, and then you got like video games, and it's like, well, that's kind of a level of art too, right? Like you look at
Yeah,
someone like the people who made you know, like let's say Dark Duel Stories, you know, an early uh, Yu-Gi-Oh video game where they had to digitize all of these cards, not necessarily even like digitize them. A lot of them just had to be like completely made from scratch because they're not like one to one with the physical cards, which makes it all the more fascinating. I recall there was a channel that did a video on the Pokemon card game, like the Game Boy game, and just how they're able to translate the physical cards into the digital stuff. But like now in Yu-Gi-Oh, we don't really have that anymore. It's all just the plain
text.
ass card scanned, bam, bing, pam, and enter sound effects here, and like it's there.
Yeah, something that's always fascinated me is when you get art created through limitation. So, like, if you look back into very old video games, like the first Legend of Zelda or the first Mario and stuff, and you have that pixely art and stuff. That wasn't because they liked the pixel art aesthetic. That was because they could only show so
Hmm.
much detail on those sorts of things with the technology at the time, and so that was art built out of limitation. And it's always cool to me when now in the modern day get some modern indie games also doing that pixel art style, not because it's necessary anymore, but because they're like, I like that aesthetic. That aesthetic. I grew up on that aesthetic, and I like it. And I'm gonna show that you can make like pretty things in it here. And there are some benefits to it as well. Like it's easier for indie developers to make things in pixel art because you know um, they don't have all the resources of big AAA studios and things like that. But it is just kind of neat to see how art influences itself, especially art built out of limitations.
Yeah, I think it's trickier with card games because the main thing with card games that you need to do is to be able to read the cards to open them up. You know, you play even a little bit later, but more sophisticated games, at least compared to Dark Duel stories like Eternal Duel Soul and stuff, it's still very like pixely on the board. But then you have to like open the card up and see what it does, and see the art to some degree as pixely as it is. But as we get to the later stages, I don't know what the first Yugioh game would have the most would be like considered like the first like clean scan of the cards. Like you can't really go back from that unless like you're specifically like an indie dev and you want to make something really like that. But it's just it's a little bit tough in regards to a card game when it like that when the card is so important to the game.
Yeah, and I think it shows too because Yu-Gi-Oh cards were not designed with video games in mind. They were designed with people just playing them in mind, right?
Mm,
Well, I
right.
guess you could argue they were designed with the manga in mind first, but the design shifted once it sort of, at least in the TCG, by the time it came to the TCG, it had shifted. The OCG used the original sort of framing, but then they shifted that to a more readable style as the effects got more important, I think. But it's kind of interesting because like not meant for a video game, so it translates poorly to a video game. But if you look at something like Inscription, I'm not sure if you ever played that game, but that's a really good game that's based largely around a card game. And the cards in that, instead of having a ton of text or information like that, it just uses basically symbols
Mm.
to illustrate what the cards do. And that makes it much more readable when you're just looking at the game board. You're like, okay, I can understand this at a glance. I don't need to, highlight over a card to see what it does on the side. I can just see it as is. Um, and it's sort of one of the benefits if you're building a card game for a video game from the ground up versus translating one over.
Yeah, some of the early games had that like alignment system, like Forbidden Memories and Dark Duel
Mm.
Stories, and I believe Sacred Cards and Reshuffle Destruction. I could be mistaken on that. Um, but those are also like way more like gimmicky things. And also, they're kind of in other games like Hearthstone and whatnot, right? It's a lot more like keywords in the thing.
Yeah.
So stuff like Hearthstone or Inscription can kind of get away with that. Whereas Yu-Gi-Oh is such a complicated game, especially nowadays. It's like you really need like so much information and so many things, especially as simulators get more and more complex. Uh,
Yeah.
that really involve like damage step and battle step and different things of like the end phase that a lot of the older games didn't even bother touching.
Yeah, honestly, you bring up a good point about keywords, and honestly, if you're doing a simulator for Yu-Gi-Oh, this is probably going to be a controversial statement, but I would not be opposed if basically keywords were made up for it just to make it more readable. And the
Mm,
reason for this is I'm thinking back to like Magic Arena because I played a fair amount of Magic Arena back in the early days of it. And I remember when there would be keywords, you could hover over the keyword and it would pop up a window on the side and say, "This is what this keyword means." So I think that like having on Yu-Gi-Oh cards in a simulator, especially when different archetypes oftentimes do a similar effect over the course of it, just differing in like the last part of it. Like if you think about Gladiator Beasts, for instance, right? Gladiator Beasts
mm-hmm.
generally have the clause that at the end of the battle phase, if they battle, you can shuffle them back in the deck and bring in a different one. And that could maybe be a keyword like tag out or something. And it would be a bit hard going from like the physical card game to the simulator using those keywords, but once you scroll over the keyword once and you're like, oh, that's what tag out means. It just means what you normally do with Dire Beast on the in the physical game. Then I think it would be very easy to adjust to, and then you would get to see what the card actually does, right? Because you could focus on like for Gladiator Beast Vermillo, you wouldn't necessarily need to focus on the part about shuffling back into the deck. You just focus on destroy one monster on the field, when it's
Mm.
brought out. Um, so I think honestly that wouldn't be a bad thing for a simulator to have.
Yeah, because I know Konami's have stated that they don't want to add keywords to the game. Um, I believe this was like around 2012-ish. They put the statement
Yeah.
out. Um,
And to be
and
clear, like, I'm not advocating for them adding keywords to the physical game. I'm just
mhm.
advocating for whatever simulator they have, putting the keywords in there
Right.
because
Well, I believe their like original like the reason for it was because they didn't want to like complicate the game more of having people have to like look through like glossaries and stuff. But
yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
But
You already have like a rule book in the game. There's already certain things that have icons and they shortened what was before piercing damage into piercing damage, and they
yeah,
could just shorten that to piercing because you already have to know what piercing is. And I think my running theory is part of it is that they don't want to change Takahashi's cards that much, right, from like what he
mm,
designed, which is why I think that they're more open to like do all these bigger changes in Rush Duel,
mm.
the full art and the breaking out of the border and all these like changing things. I think like that's my running head theory for that.
I could definitely believe it. But for the card text itself, I mean that I don't think Takahashi had a big hand in that part of it. So I think you could maybe change it, but I don't know. I do think that like the glossary thing is definitely alleviated by a video game, right? Where
Hmm.
it's just like you don't need to be searching through the glossary because the video game's just like, oh, you hover over the keyword, here's what it means, right? And so that part helps there. And also, you could argue that even a video game is like going away from Takahashi's like intended vision in some way because you're not in front of another person playing this card game. You're just competing with someone online, potentially who you don't know, who's just a stranger that you have basically no interaction with outside of the card game itself, right? Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think like I think that theory could definitely be correct. But if we're talking about ideal simulators and stuff, like if we could have the reins to a simulator ourselves, for me personally, that wouldn't be as much of an issue. Um,
Yeah, you gotta
unless
wonder if
Takahashi,
yeah, you gotta wonder if
yeah,
Takahashi thinks video games are like sacrilegious or something. It's like they're
I
not
mean,
in
he might. I mean,
person.
well, he did have the no, yeah, because the virtual arc wasn't in the original manga, right?
No, filler.
It was filler for the anime. So we don't necessarily know his opinions on video games.
I'm trying to think if there were like any chapters that was like based on a video game. Like there were
I think
some
like
like weird ones that was like, oh, I can see how that was inspired by a video game. Like there was one in the Death
yeah.
Key arc where it's like falling blocks like Tetris, but like it's real blocks they're trying to murder the gang.
Yeah. Also, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how much we should be looking or trying to pull out of the death game part because I'm not sure Takahashi, just because there's a death game revolving around a certain thing, I'm not sure if he's like, and that death game exists because I am morally opposed to this game. This game is actually evil, and that's why it's in the death game. Um, but yeah, it is kind of. I mean, there's always interesting stuff to pull from this sort of stuff. But yeah, I just think that I'm not sure he touched on video games at all in those. Besides, as you
Yeah.
say, the inspirations for them.
Well, I think that's like the good thing about like a video game medium too is that you can have all these extra like menus and things in it
Mm.
that you don't have to have in a card game, which kind of helps people to learn the game in a lot of ways. Like how many people learn the game more in a way by playing a lot of these classic games, whether it was on like Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, DS, GameCube, whatever.
And if we're talking about like automated simulators too versus manual simulators, the automation really does, as you said, Yu-Gi-Oh has a lot of complicated rulings, and automation can help sort of disabuse people of certain notions, right? Like
Mm.
the idea that MST negates, right? If you do that in an automated simulator, you're like, wait, the effect still goes through, then you don't have to sort of I mean, if you're just playing with friends who don't necessarily know all the rulings and you go for MST and you negate it, then the friend might be like, "Oh, that seems like it would work, yeah." And then
Mm.
you just go under that false assumption forever long you're playing with that friend group. Whereas, the simulators, that is the hard and fast coded rule. The way they work, ideally, if they're coded correctly, is going to be how the game always works. So
I mean, that's how a
it
lot
can't
of
be
people figured out how cards like Waboku and Ultimate Offering and like Last Will and Imperial Order and stuff like that work. Now, granted, rulings change over time depending on which specific TCG story you're at. But a lot of like the basic mechanics of cards, a lot of people did figure out from a video game originally, or at least refer to a video game for specific points in time to see okay how did they intend for this card to work if the card text on the physical card was kind of confusing.
Yeah. And I think honestly, like if we're talking about the ideal simulator, I think the ideal simulator would take in well, so maybe it's jumping ahead a bit because for me personally, I think that an ideal simulator, maybe it's just because I'm so into so many retro Yu-Gi-Oh formats, I would like an ideal simulator to be able to simulate the rules for those formats as well. And so, things like replay in the battle phase has changed over time. Things like ignition effect priority has changed over time. So like for me personally, I'd like if there was a way to like switch between those depending on like what you want
Mm.
to play. I mean, I would also probably say that ideally my ideal simulator would have those formats just built into them. So it's like, I want to play a fiber format game. You click on the fiber format game mode or something. Um, that I mean, that is probably a bit too pie in the sky. But if
Mm.
we're saying just ideal concept, that would be mine,
I mean, it would be
or part of mine.
great, you know, like it'd be great if, because like I can't see like them ever putting out a game that's like critter format and Yugi Kaiba format, but I could certainly see a world where the, it takes like, all right, here is like Dual Monsters era and GX era and 5Ds era, and the rules are like slightly different. Like one, like the first four eras or whatever, you can draw first turn, or perhaps some cards like Ring of Destruction works differently in this compared to that, and potentially they could add something where you can sort of create your own formats, so to speak, where
Mm.
they give you like the card pool of all the cards, and you pick like a cutoff point, and then you can make your own list of banned cards, limited cards, what have you, and
Yeah,
then work
I
with
think that'd
that,
be awesome.
like almost like a filtering option, per se. Uh, because I feel like the more options that we have for Yu-Gi-Oh video games, the better. Because like I primarily use Dueling Book, to play
Mm.
online Yu-Gi-Oh, but I think EDO Pro has a lot of positives for it too. I think Master Duel has a lot of positives for it too. So I think it would be important to like look at all these different Yu-Gi-Oh video games and see, all right, what are these doing right? What are they doing wrong? And what could they potentially do better? Now, a lot of this, I don't expect Konami to ever jump into anything too complicated. Nor do I see just some some fan doing it because it's such a gigantic undertaking. Like Dueling Book is already, like they've done so much in the last 10 or so years, and that's, like there's only so
Yeah.
much you can do.
Yeah, although I do think, if someone does want to undertake something of this scale, one way to potentially do it would be to combine it with so this is sort of an idea that I've had for a time. And I don't know how feasible it is, but it would be very, very cool if it ever got put into practice. And I would 100% spend money on it. Is if it's like a Yu-Gi-Oh simulator that's more like an RPG, so kind of like some of the older games like Nightmare Troubadour or things like that, where you're sort of building a deck and then going around. But the gimmick of it is it's not set in like the Yu-Gi-Oh world, so there's no Domino City, no nothing. It's set in the real world, and what it is, you're going to your local card shop, and they're like, "Oh, we got this new game that's out. It's called Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff." And it basically it tracks your character growth over time, like throughout as
Mm.
the game evolves over time. So like the first sort of level or levels or whatever is just you playing with like the card pool of like Legend of Blue Eyes or the Starter decks or whatever, and you're playing that. Maybe you have like a rival that shows up, who's always playing like the most meta deck at the time or something, and that's like the final boss that you have to defeat to move on to the next era of the game. But I think it would be cool, and there would be a lot of very interesting sort of story things that you could do. Like maybe some players over time, like they're like, oh, I need to take a break from the game, so they're out of the game. But then a couple of levels or time periods later, they come back, and it's like, oh, there's this guy back. I get to duel against them or something. Or maybe certain characters have like a different gimmick deck that they continue to focus on. Like as time goes on, they just keep buffing up that deck with certain new cards that have released.
I'm
Um,
picturing like a Yu-Gi-Oh like Persona, or
Yeah,
like the I forgot what it's called, the story mode in, or not story mode, like the whatever that mode was in Street Fighter 6, like the Fighters Road or whatever it's called.
yeah, where you can actually like get to know the characters and stuff, and
Yeah, there's like
uh,
a virtual card shop and stuff, and like there are tables that only so many people can sit on and whatnot.
yeah, and that would be, I mean, that sort of thing would be my ideal thing. Like, I don't know, and that would be something where it's like if it is someone like undertaking this, then they don't necessarily have to focus on getting the entire game out like right away. They could do like just the first part of it, where it's just like Legend of Blue Eyes or the beginning of it, to start with, and then they just keep building on
Mm-hmm.
and just adding more over time, and so it sort of grows organically. Um,
Be
but
Yu-Gi-Oh Yandere.
yeah, well, no, no, no. Let's not get Yu-Gi-Oh! Yandere sim, but you know, it's one. I'd like this game if it ever did go into development to actually come out eventually, but you know,
Yeah,
but two, we don't need to open
I
that
think
old can of worms.
yeah, I think that'd be a good
Mm.
way to go about it. Just like start on like the very first format, and then like work their way down. Because there's always the thing is like, all right, do we want to do like an adventure mode, or do you want to keep it just like a pure simulator game? Because quite frankly, and that's what most people are pretty much there for, is to like play the game and deck build, like very like basic uh Yu-Gi-Oh things. But there's so much untapped potential though with having like an adventure or like a story mode type of deal, that I'm honestly shocked that we have not really seen anything like that. I think that's why a lot of people enjoy the Sacred Cards, because it did replicate the Battle City arc, and yet for some reason we've never gotten like a console full 3D Yu-Gi-Oh game that's like, all right, Duels Kingdom, Battle City, Millennium World, and
Yeah,
have duels and like cool 3D stuff with that. Like I am like shocked we have not received that yet. The only console
I'd spend
stuff we
money
get
on
is
it.
like Duelist of the Roses and Falsebound King,
I mean, those are
like
cool for sure, and like people have definitely enjoyed them and stuff. And I think it's fun to see the monsters sort of translated over to those sorts of things. But I agree with you 100%. We need our full, you know, I mean, the original Yu-Gi-Oh anime is done too, so you could just
hmm
encapsulate it as like that game, and if that game goes well, you do it to GX and so on.
like
We
I
kind of got that a
was
little bit with the Yu-Gi-Oh game. How it was I have it on Steam, but let me pull up what the name of that game
I know
is.
there's Legacy of
But
the Duelist on
that's
Steam
what
where
I yeah,
like that you can
that one.
go like through the you know like I was really disappointed because I bought that when it came out on the Switch.
Mhm.
Um, and I actually streamed it like back years when it came out, like before I was doing like Yu-Gi-Oh content. And I remember just being really disappointed that the story mode, like it was just paper cutout cutscenes. I'm like, this is the best they can do. And even the Duels Kingdom stuff, everything was like everyone was in their Battle City costumes. Like they couldn't even be bothered to put new PNGs in the game. Like what?
Yeah, they also like cut out a lot of important duels that would have been really cool to include. Um, and it was yeah, it was very disappointing in my opinion. Um, I still played it and found it fun
Mhm.
because it was like a Yu-Gi-Oh auto sim at the time, and I like that sort of thing. So I enjoyed it for what it was, but it definitely could have been a lot better. And I do feel like the story mode is a complete missed opportunity. Um, but I guess it does take a lot to sort of go into that and do that right. But I think the game that does that the best that I've played that I enjoy the most is Dual Transer, if you know that one.
That's
Um,
one on the Wii.
yeah, it's on the Wii. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's from the 5Ds era, and it was really cool because it was like an original story. It was you saying the gang on this island where this guy was trying to start Ragnarok or something. But it was just very very interesting story, and it had a ton of different people that you could play, either characters from the show or not. And you'd face them once, and then later on you'd face them again, and they'd upgrade their deck, which is not new to that game for sure, but like it was still fun to see that. And part of why I want to see different characters upgrade their decks over time in the proposed game that I said earlier.
Okay, how
And
about
yeah, it's fun.
this? How about it's it's Yu-Gi-Oh Pokemon. So it's
Oh,
like Yu-Gi-Oh. It's like Pokemon where you have like a pre-made world and you have like leaders around and you have to go dueling people, upgrading your decks. You beat people, maybe you get like a cards or something. There's like vendors and keep upgrading your deck, keep trading cards and this, and like you're slowly increasing your power gap. Like it's shortening up. Um, which is what I kind of like for some of the video games, like when I was playing Eternal Duel Soul, where you start with like a very weak deck. All monsters are like they're very petite, very under 1,000, and then by the end you're like, I got my Gemini elves, I got my Ring of Destructions. So I think something like that could be kind of fun, like a pre-made like story adventure in a kind of similar vein of Pokemon because they are fairly like similar in a lot of ways. Both like when they around the time when they gained popularity and in the card games, and it just feels like Yu-Gi-Oh hasn't really hit that video game medium as most people feel like they should be.
yeah. I feel like the biggest issue is that, like, if you look at Pokemon, right, and you're a Pokemon trainer going through the world collecting different Pokemon, etc. You can put together a bunch of different team comps, but realistically, at the end of the day, like each Pokemon stands on its own as its own thing,
Hmm.
and so like you don't really need. You do need if you want to like beat the Elite Four, you need to worry about how your team covers all the different bases of like the different type matchups and things like that. But at the end of the day, if you're just playing the game and you're like, I like these Pokemon, I can throw them together and just make a team of that and go through and probably do fine, right? You're not going to win a
Hmm.
Nuzlocke with that, but you're going to probably do fine. Whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh, if you're like, I like this card, I like this card, I'm just going to throw together a bunch of random cards that I've encountered over the course of the way. You can't really do that. It doesn't really make a consistent deck a lot of the time. Um, and so it's a bit awkward there. So you kind of have to, be able to collect full archetypes to make an archetypal deck. But then that's kind of awkward in its own way because then like, you either have to have a certain area where you just grind for that particular archetype, or you have to, do other things like buying an archetype all at once, but then you don't feel that sense of progression as you slowly build up the thing.
Hmm.
So it's kind of tricky to balance in that way.
So what's up, Lee? What's going on? Like I think they could like I think like a potential way to go about that is like if you beat like a leader, right? Leaders are perhaps like archetypal characters, like maybe one has dark scorpions or heroes, whatever. And you get like the core of that. Like
Mm.
not maybe not necessarily every card in that, but at least like a package to build a deck around. I think that could be an interesting way. Um, because I think another like discussion issue is that do we like would you want something that's like dueling book, right, where you have every card available of all the time? Because I know a lot of people like Master Duel, right, where you do have to work for your cards. You can buy stuff, which from a developer standpoint, yeah, it makes sense, right? If you're having this, that's a game that's more of a live service. You want to give them sort of things. You have events and periods in time where like, oh, you play it, you get this, you join, you get this, or uh, you open like these packs to get like higher rarity stuff to play. Like I think that's like certainly an interesting point in Yu-Gi-Oh. Personally, I'd rather just have every card available just to like make my decks and play with them. But I understand like from a game design of not giving a player like everything immediately.
Yeah, if we're making a game that wants to make money, wants to be sold, and then you're making money on top of that, I do think Master Duel is basically perfect at what it does because Master Duel, like, you can get if you want to just jump into the game, get a deck that you can play with and go. Like it will take some grinding, but you can get that deck for free, right? You don't need to spend a ton of money on it. And the awkward part comes when that deck that you grind so hard for then shifts out of the meta, and then you've got to either grind all over again or just be like, I don't have time to grind anymore. I got to pay money for
Hmm.
the new cards and stuff. but I do think it's pretty perfect at like what it's trying to do in terms of its economy, and that's really hard to get right in a game like this. Like there's so many other games I've seen where people are like constantly complaining about not being able to get what they need without just paying for a deck that can win. And I feel like I haven't really seen those complaints with Master Duel. So if we are making a game like Master Duel, I think it's hard to top Master Duel's sort of um, economy there. I would
Unless,
also argue,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I would also argue that like you, I would like personally, if I'm playing a game or auto sim or something, I'd like to just have all the cards free to play with.
Hmm.
Um, but, if we are doing something like Master Duel, I think that's the best way you can do it.
Yeah, like like I would refer again back to something like Pokemon, where it's not like you get all the Pokemon like after you beat the game or anything like that. You still have to like work for your Pokemon, train your Pokemon. Then you have like that team. You're like, I built this team. This is my team. Except for the one caveat being is that when Konami doesn't add all the cards, that's the thing. That's why everyone likes the national decks in Pokemon. Although I do prefer a non-national decks just for balancing reasons. But I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is like a wholly different issue with that. Where like I feel like you should add all the cards because there's gonna be someone who's like who really wants to play that Air Neos that they cannot play in Master Duel because it is just not on there.
Yeah, well, that might get into copyright issues as people have theorized.
Potentially,
Which I can't.
I am working on a video right now. It's in the script phase about Air Neos. So it won't be out till like August, but
Well,
I have been going over every possible topic. I did have a community post I posted yesterday asking people about Air Neos, so it is on my mind right now.
yeah, and I mean, I don't know. Maybe they'll come out and it'll reveal that it was just a frivolous decision where they're just like there's one executive who just really hated that card and just was like, no, I don't want this in the game at all.
A
It should be gone.
Birdman.
Yeah, I can't have that. So maybe it's just that. But if there are other legal reasons for not having it, that does make it a bit awkward for implementing in a video game licensed by the company. But honestly, I feel like our ideal version of a Yu-Gi-Oh video game would probably be a fan-made game.
Yeah, like it's
Just due to
never
the
gonna
freedom there.
be like it's never gonna be perfect, right? Yu-Gi-Oh has what like 10,000 something cards. Like
Yeah.
there's like there is possible to put all of them in the game. I'm sure like it couldn't possibly be that difficult, right? I don't know how coding and bugs work. Hey, Elusive Mirror, what's up? There are JRPGs with extremely complex and punishing battle systems that nonetheless sell very well, so I don't see why a Yu-Gi-Oh video game couldn't be both more similar to Pokemon yet less accessible. Also see the popularity of Souls games. I think the hard question is how to introduce increasing complexity in a satisfying way.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, because it's like the issue that I see potentially with like, you know, oh well, it's difficult to make a good core of a good deck, but you can eventually do it with enough hard work, is that like you want to make sure, as you say, that the game increases in complexity as you go along. So it's not just like you have to just grind really hard to get over a certain thing,
Hmm.
because that quickly gets boring, right? If people just have to like grind repeatedly for getting other cards to then beat a certain boss, then if you're just jumping in the game and you're like trying to play casually, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna play a different game because I don't find grinding the same thing over and over again to get these cards that I need to be that entertaining. So I do think you're exactly right where it's like the key to it, like it could definitely work, but the key to it would be like figuring out a good way to make it so that it never feels like you're truly wasting your time to do things,
Hmm.
but the difficulty curve also makes it so that like you feel like you have to work hard for all the cards at the same time, as opposed to just like when you defeat someone, you get like you know some big portion of their deck that you can then build from. Like to me, I would be like, oh neat, I've got this. I didn't work hard for it, so I don't really like care about playing it or not, right? Um,
On the opposite side of that, though, you have a new player coming in, and there's like so many cards that they're like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know what's good. I don't know what's bad. There's just like there's so many, and honestly, like part of that I think could just be fixed by just having a just good tutorial modes, like have not just like simple ones, like oh here are your main phases. Here's like battling, attack, summoning, whatever. Like a lot of like tutorial and very specific things like, oh, like the battle step, what works in that, what doesn't work in that, what happens if like this card, like maybe not necessarily every sort of like interaction, but maybe just like very key ones are that could come up in relation to like how the game as a whole functions.
Yeah, and I'm kind of shocked that no Yu-Gi-Oh game that I can think of actually has a good version of a tutorial, which is kind of wild. But like, I mean, back in the early days, you could argue that they didn't really need it because it's like a simple enough game. Even if
Yeah.
damage step rulings are kind of awkward. Like, if you're a kid playing it, you don't need to necessarily know them to like win the game or do well most of the time. Um, but like nowadays, like you look at like Master Duel, and I remember watching Raren, who's a Hearthstone YouTuber and streamer. They tried getting into a bunch of different card games. They tried getting into Yu-Gi-Oh through Master Duel, and one of the big sticking points for them was that like the tutorial was not how the game plays at all, right? Tutorial was like, here's what a normal summon is, you know, here's what attacking is and stuff. And then after the very, very basics were done, it was like, okay, you're good to go off in the world, with your deck and doing things.
Hmm.
And it's very, very different from how the modern version of the game is. So you need to have like in-depth tutorials for like a lot of the rulings that do come up, but also like you need to make it representative of the game itself as well, which is where the tricky point is. And I don't think Konami's really figured out a way to do that, even though they do have like, solo modes for certain decks where it's like, oh, get to know the combos of this deck. The solo mode decks often don't really cover like, a lot of the, like more competitive combos for them, right? Like
Hmm.
it generally focuses on the pure versions as opposed to just like, you know, okay, if you're playing certain decks, you're going to be playing these cards as well that aren't necessarily in the archetype, but they synergize so well with the archetype that it would be like doing a Mermail tutorial without having like the Atlantean monsters in it.
I could even see like them adding some sort of, uh, like I'm going to use a term again, even though it may maybe think of a different term, but like a glossary, but for like archetypes, right? Like you have a
Yeah,
one that talks about mermail, so you open it up and it's you know however many pages it is talking about. All right, this is how the archetype can play. Here's some like alternate strategies you could try out. Here's like a couple cards that you can consider messing with it and just kind of like lead the player into how this strategy works instead of outright telling them, hey, this is how they're played for sure. Here's absolutely everything ad nauseum. Just like, all right, here's a rough overview of how this deck operates. I mean, there's going to be decks that don't necessarily work. Like decks that are more abstract, but those are also just more of like the fringe kind of things that that new players aren't even going to like initially gravitate towards.
yeah. And to be fair, I think the tutorials like are an attempt at that, at what you're saying, but
Hmm.
I don't think they necessarily do enough of a good job. Like if you jump into a tutorial, you're like, oh, neat, this is how the deck plays. But like you're facing decks that don't really do anything against them for the most part. And also like it focuses on one part of it at a time. So the decks they give you to represent it are focusing on like one part of the strategy at a time. And so the decks themselves aren't really even the full way to do it. So I do like, for me personally, I learn better when just seeing like, okay, what are the main combos of the deck? Here they are. And then trying to fit them together into a deck
Hmm.
on my own that way. Um, or just getting a loner deck that is actually competent, like completely competent, not
Hmm.
just like being towards one gimmick or another and being like, okay, try and experiment with this loner deck. What do I do now? Right.
I mean, a
Um,
great way is kind of like with dueling book how you can watch replays. Like anyone who like posts a replay, you can be like you can ask someone in whatever format Discord you're in or whatever forum, like, hey, can you send me like just use Mermail for example, a Mermail replay, and then you can kind of watch it. It's like, all right, what are they doing? How does these work? Like, I think the replay function in Dueling Book is really key, personally.
oh yeah, and
Uh,
and they've got that in Master Duel too. You can watch
yeah.
Master Duel replay as well. I think it's one of the best things to do in a card game, not just for watching other people's replays to see how they play the game, but
Hmm.
also watching your own replays to see like, okay, here I could have done this combo instead in hindsight. Or maybe you don't realize that yourself. Maybe you post your own mermail replay to a group and you're like, here's a replay that I did. I felt like okay, but I felt like there were things that I could have done better. What
Hmm.
have any tips for me? And then people can help you out with that.
Yeah, but self reflection
So
is like such a important thing. Like I'm the kind of person that like I'll notice the mistake like right after I make it.
Yeah,
So
no,
you,
I do that sometimes too, where it's like, oh my goodness, why did I do that? And especially because a lot of the replays or a lot of the games that I play are for my videos. I'm like,
hmm.
oh man, I'm gonna have to explain
Yeah.
that one in the replay
Oh god, when I
analysis.
do that, but my
Yeah,
mind moves so fast and it's already processing the replay like in my brain.
yeah. But
Elusive.
sometimes
Uh, yeah.
sometimes like I jump into a replay and like I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, here I remember from playing it. I'm like, okay, I remember that I made this mistake here. But then I noticed like earlier on, I made another mistake that led to that mistake, right? Like,
Hmm.
and so it is really just good to dive in. Like, even if you realize some in the moment, like once you dive into it, like you see so much more potentially. Um,
Yeah, this game should feature a like one of those like that paperclip Microsoft Word
oh
mascot,
yeah.
and just being like, "Hey, here's what you did wrong, buddy."
Well, honestly, like I think at a certain point, like I mean, this will probably be like if AI gets better or something. Like having like an AI coach in the game could be
Hmm.
really helpful.
An
Where it's just
AI
like,
deck builder.
well, I think we're already partially there with the AI deck builders. That's a lot easier to do because all you have to do is train a model on just a bunch of decks for a given archetype. Be like, look at these decks, look at how they look, and then the model can just fill in decks so that way it looks like the things it's seen.
That would be a
Um,
fascinating experiment. I would hate that though, because like I personally love deck building, but
yeah,
that
no, and
seems really fascinating.
yeah, and some people honestly don't really like the idea of even an AI tutor probably for this sort of thing. They'd probably just want to go through, make their own mistakes, and then learn from their own mistakes that way and
Hmm.
try and figure it out all themselves. So it really does depend on the type of player you are. But there are also people out there who are like, I hate deck building. I love playing the game, but I hate deck building. And so they would be happy with an AI deck builder. So having these options available for people would probably be good, even if but they have to be able to be shut off for sure.
Yeah, like I personally think as far as like AI goes, that it should just be for the most like grunt work of things. So, something like if you're building a deck and you start putting a deck together and then like this AI or whatever says, "All right, here are some cards that we suggest could be used for your deck." I think that would be the best way to go about that. Because like while like there's always going to be people that would rather just have the deck built for them, but like there's like no, I feel like there's no fun in that personally.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think also it's good to develop deck building skills because that then helps your play skills as well. Like I think it's all
mhm,
related. Where like if you build your deck yourself and have to think about like, oh, okay, why is this card here? Right? Like what is the purpose of this card? Why am I including it in the deck? Then when you draw that card in the game, you're like, oh, this is the card that does this. So now I can use it for this, rather than just being like, drawing card being like, oh, let me read this over real quick. Okay, I guess I could maybe use that here.
mhm.
I don't know exactly what this is for though. So I do think that like deck building is a very important skill to learn just to become better at the game itself.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
Elusive Mirror says, building on something along those puzzles in the World Championship games, I think could be a good way to teach people about stuff like damage step interactions, card advantage, etc. Also, Son of El Chapo, what's up? Nightmare Troubadour is the best. I
it's a
think that's
near
what it says.
perfect game for me. I think.
Near perfect game for me, just too short of a game. Yeah, I really
Yeah,
like the because I know EDO has like the dueling puzzles. Um, and I think something
yeah.
like that, but for like not as like convoluted things, like you said, the damage step and stuff would be interesting, or just be like, all right, give me the best card advantage here, kind of deal.
I wish Master Duel had like weekly or daily puzzles, just for it because other previous Yu-Gi-Oh video games have had puzzles, so it's not like it's alien a concept to Konami.
Hmm.
Um, and they're so like fun. And I'm there are plenty of people in the community who make puzzles too. So if they wanted to hire someone, there are people out there who have the experience doing this sort of thing. But I do think they're really engaging. They can teach people things they didn't know. For instance, I remember I was once doing a duel puzzle, and the solution to it involved setting a Toon Gemini Elf and then using Book of Tide to flip it up. So that way you could attack with it that turn. Because it wasn't technically flip summoned, it wasn't normal summoned. So, you could actually attack it. You could get around that restriction that it had, where normally it can't attack the turn summoned, wasn't technically summoned that turn. So that taught me something that I never knew about the tunes, where you could get around it that way. And I think there's a lot of different things that you could do. Like again, as you said, it doesn't necessarily need to be a complicated thing like the damage step, although it could definitely be that, to teach people about that. But being able to experiment with those puzzles and go through all the different options and finally figure out like why the puzzle can work that way is a really good teaching tool, I think.
And they can even have stuff like that for archetypes too. I know we kind of talked about this a little earlier, but where you have like, let's say they create one for tunes, and there's uh, like a 10-step thing for tunes of increasingly tougher combos and whatnot to get. Like I think of fighting games, right, where you have like each combo for a character to get before you hit like a certain, you get a prize for completing all of them. Like maybe you get a high rarity card or some whatever specialty card. Moose, what's up? The Book of Taiyu combo works with Grandora too, so it can stay on the field for more than a one turn.
Yeah, and I never knew that. And so it would be cool too because like, with things like that, you learn things like that too. And I think you're exactly right that for archetypes themselves, that'd be really really good way of learning them. And honestly, that to me would be a perfect tutorial for those archetypes because as the puzzles increase in difficulty, your understanding of the deck becomes better and it makes sure that you have to know certain key combos or interactions that you might not know otherwise. Um, I think one of the flaws with the current tutorials and Master Duel is that like even if it gives you a deck going for a certain combo, you can still win the game without going for that combo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the games are not scripted, well, except for like the very beginning of each tutorial. But like once you get into it, like with loner decks, the games are not scripted. You just have to win the game, and you can win the game without doing anything that the tutorial wants you to do. So yeah, I think those puzzles would be a really really good way to fix that problem.
So speaking of Master Duel, I know a big contention to that game is that Maxi is just like it refuses to leave the game.
Mm.
Um, so do you think like these games should have their own rotating list, or should they follow the TCG slash OCG? Like
So
have different things. 'Cause I know that's the thing a lot of people complain about Master Duel, right? You can't really replicate these more true to life formats, and it creates a divide between Master Duel and the actual game, which is really a shame, honestly.
yeah, and I personally, in my ideal dueling game, it would be based only on real formats. And you could argue that this never really was a thing, even going back to the games we played as kids, right? Those were always based on like OCG
Hmm.
formats, and yet we never really cared because we were like, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh, it's fun. We're just playing Yu-Gi-Oh on a video game. Um, and so and people nowadays, while it is a contentious point as you mentioned, people nowadays I think have gotten used to it. They're like, okay, well, there's TCG, there's OCG, and there's Master Duel, and there's different formats, right? Um,
I think the term is calloused.
yeah,
Become callous to
uh,
the idea.
yeah, we built up those calluses, but I don't necessarily think those calluses have to be ripped off. Like, I think the current state of things is fine for how it is now, but I do agree that like in the ideal world, like if I had a say in making an ideal video game, I would say partially because I just like retro formats. I'd be like base it on every retro format that's ever happened and up to the present day, and just keep adding more formats as like new cards come out and stuff. Um, but for Konami, what they're doing right now, I think it's perfectly fine because they've got to somehow meld OCG and TCG together so that way people on both sides play Master Duel.
Mm.
Um, and so they've just put together this hodgepodge format, and I think people have grown used to it and grown to like it. So if people
The
are enjoying it,
the
that's what matters.
the thing for me is at least just giving players the option to it. Because even if you don't like include like retro formats, I feel like a game should at the very least include like current TCG, current OCG, let's say Master Duel format, like the video game format, and then any other formats that Konami is actively supporting. So Time Wizard formats, right? Goat, Edison, Tengu Plant, Speed Duel, Rush Duel. I think those are like, that's 8 right there. That's already a lot, but those, they're all currently supported formats that should be representation or should be represented in video game form. Minino Globe says Eternal Duel Soul is gold to play old school Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
old but gold.
if you want to play that specific format, which that's also based off an OCG format, you have to play Eternal Duel of Soul. You can't do that in Master Duel, really. Anyway.
Yeah. So I think that yeah, the ideal thing would be to give as many options as possible. We're building our impractical, but dream game. Then I would say, yeah, toggle on to all those. Like
Mm-hmm.
even Master Duel, you could do a thing where like they could just be like, you know, okay, we really liked what Master Duel was like a year ago. And here's a format that you can play if you want to play, Master Duel as it was 1 year ago, right? With this list and all
Right.
that stuff. Although they probably wouldn't like that as much because then people wouldn't buy the new cards. They could just stick with their old decks and play that old deck in Master Duel all the time.
Yeah, you want
Um,
people playing all like the modern stuff, which also makes it even more tricky if you start introducing other formats. Because if you start introducing all the TCG formats, then you're gonna also have to introduce all of the OCG formats, and that
yeah,
that seems incredibly messy, especially just given how Konami is already, right. Like they don't want to support stuff that they're not making any money off of, so
yeah.
why support these things that are decades old?
And if you think about it, that's probably why they don't have a permanent like goat format room. Like they did the event, which was back in time to goat
Hmm.
format and stuff, and that was really cool. But part of why they did that was because people do not have the staples of goat format like in their card pool like normally. So people had to craft that or buy that or whatever for that event. And then if they just said, okay, we're making this a permanent thing that people could ever play with, then they're probably worried that some players would just be like, okay, I'll just play this the entire time and never play the modern Master Duel. So I never have to craft or buy any other new cards for the rest of my time here, right? And they're not making money off that player, so they don't really want to do that. Whereas in the modern day, TCG or even the physical OCG, right? If they're doing Time Wizard events, they can always reprint older cards with either alt arts or maybe upgraded rarities or things like that. And people will buy that because people are like, oh, I like, the secret rare version of Pot of Greed or something. I want to get that and put it in my deck, right? Like, so you can always still make money on the time limited formats when you're doing it for TCG, but from a video game like Master Duel, it's a bit different, I think.
I so I would say my workaround for that would be pretty much how I wanted Konami to do timers and formats in general, was to have a yearly rotation for it, or some sort of designated time span that isn't just like one event, but like, all right, 6 months, a year, however long, we're going to have this format. It's going to be fully supported and played and showcased. And once that year winds up, we're going to switch to a different format, which gives people more of a time span to really grind something out. And maybe by the end of that format, you rack up your points and then give out prizes or whatever. Like that would be the way I would go about that personally, because that way you still have the main format still around, but you have this alternate one that people can try, but it's not gonna, like, they can't necessarily stick to that forever. They still have to like evolve with the game, which I think is also kind of important too, just to have people stay with the game and learn with it and figure out like all the new releases and that, instead of just kind of, I don't want to say me. I don't want to be me, but staying in the past, which is almost ironic given my Yu-Gi-Oh channel.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been someone who's like, I feel like people who make the sort of content that we do on YouTube can be just labeled as like, oh, they're Yugi boomers who only care about the old version of the game. They got their nostalgia goggles on and stuff. And like, yes, I am nostalgic for that older version of the game. Like, I like playing from that time and stuff. But also, like, I think the modern game still has stuff to enjoy as well and stuff. And I think that you're absolutely right. You want to, like, if you're Konami making this card game, you want people to be playing the modern version of the game. But I think that there is potentially a positive flow between people playing the retro format and the modern version and
Hmm.
vice versa, right? If you post things such that like you support retro formats and you support the modern formats, right? People who and oftentimes like in the same event, right? And you've seen them doing that sort of thing where like when they have a YCS, they also have a time wizard event at that YCS. And so that way if someone's going to the YCS for the time wizard event, maybe they're practicing with friends and they see some modern decks going on. They're really like, oh, maybe I should sign up for that too because I'm already going to there. I just need to, get a modern deck together and play that as well. Um, and if they have their retro deck that they've maybe been playing all year, because as you say, it could be going on for a longer period of time, then they're like, well, okay, I don't need to spend money on my older deck that I'm bringing because I already have that together. So I can probably, afford to spend a little bit on a modern deck. And of course, this is in general, this isn't in the context of Snake Eye format where, Snake Eyes is quite pricey.
Hmm.
But I do think that, like, in general, like, that is a good recipe for getting people playing the modern ones from the retro ones or vice versa, because maybe the modern players are like, they're seeing people prepare for the retro events and they're like, oh, I wonder what all the hype is about. Let me try out this. I'm going for the modern side of things anyways. Let me try the retro scene too.
And I think the like really the proof is in the pudding here because like a lot of like the retro Yu-Gi-Oh Yugi tubers, like ourselves, even though we do more historical related content than necessarily like old school content. Even though most of my stuff does lean towards old school, it's also like a specific niche that people like. So why not support that in the video game form? But on that same token, these are also relatively small channels too. You look at like all the big ones, and it's all main modern TCG and Master Duel and stuff like that. So clearly, like that's still like by far the most popular thing, right? More people are going to YCSs now than ever, and while the Time Wizard formats have been gaining popularity, like you go to a GFC or whatever, like it's not gonna have thousands of people there. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like
And
I wouldn't like if I was Konami, I wouldn't be worried about having the people worrying about people stick with those retro formats because people are gonna more naturally flock towards whatever modern format it is because that's where the majority of people are playing. That's where all the prizes are going to be, the YCSs, going to be all the new hot cards you want to stay on top of, the most competitive environments. And while I don't think that they should stray away from retro formats, I don't think they should hide away from it either. Just because again, modern stuff is like it is more popular. That's just matter of fact.
yeah. And I think part of why the modern stuff is more popular is because even if someone isn't enjoying the modern format, there's always the hope like, well, okay, maybe the next set will fix things. So I still have to be in it
Mm-hmm.
for the next set, And I need to make a deck for that set and play with that, and maybe it'll be better or more up my alley and stuff. I think part of the fear of doing a retro format is that like Goat is a great format, but like not every Yu-Gi-Oh player out there is gonna like Goat, right? There are gonna be people who don't like it, and we've seen that happen where people are like, Goat's overrated. Like, why would I ever play Goat? I want to play this instead. Um, and so I think maybe there's some fear of like, well, we don't want to just be promoting an event that only a fraction of the player base is going to play, and there's no real incentive for people who once they know they don't want to play it, and they don't like it, there's no real incentive for them to then try playing it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to a more modern event. But I do think you can get around that by just offering a larger variety, right? Like there are people who don't like Goat who would like Edison, right? And people who like and who don't like Edison who would like Goat. And I'm just using Edison and Goat because they're the two biggest retro formats at the time. But like that applies for a lot of formats out there. Like, you know, I think from covering a lot of formats on my channel, like I've noticed that different formats appeal to different people. And I don't think you can say any of them are like objectively bad, but
Hmm.
for some people they will be bad, and for some people they would be good. So the best way you entice more people is to offer a wide variety.
Yeah, because I don't like think it's fair for like Konami to be like, oh, we're not gonna put any effort because I'll keep saying this, but they gotta like give us the option to like even if it's just like kind of create like your own like make a custom format type of deal uh because even if they start adding more retro format stuff, right, it's only going to be like a couple, right? It's always going to be Goat, Edison, maybe Tengu Plant, but like are we ever going to see like world championship formats like Yada format or like I don't want to say frog format but frog format or perfect circle or all these like other formats that like someone like me like particularly enjoys and other people enjoys too that probably wouldn't even see those if they start even supporting retro formats in some of these video games that is so like hardcore on what they cover instead of trying to cover more of like the game as a whole and everything it has offered instead of just what it's currently offering.
Yeah, and I feel like that's like it's really missing out on one of Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest strengths because like yes, if you look at a game like Magic the Gathering or something, it does play differently now than it played like 20 years ago, right? Like, the games go faster, there's more power creep, etc. Planeswalkers weren't a thing way back when. But the thing about that game having set rotation is if Wizards of the Coast wants to adjust the upcoming blocks to play a certain way, they can do that, right? Because they can be like, well, okay, we're going to print cards and strategies that do this sort of thing. So, maybe it's a slower sort of thing than it was before. Maybe it's a faster, more combo oriented way than it was before. But either way, they can sort of decide how the format turns out in a way that's very organic and can just be very flexible for them. Whereas with Yu-Gi-Oh, because of the state of power creep over the course of 20 or so years, um, if you are just like, okay, I want this next format to be like control oriented and stuff, then making a deck like what you have to do is make a control deck that is so much more powerful than the other combo decks that it takes over the entire format, right? And people will complain about that sort of power creep there. Um, but, if you go back and look at, a format 10 years ago or something, that's a perfect opportunity to be like, well, okay, we need a format that's more like this, that more is along this play style, and sort of supplant it to the modern version of the game. And you can just offer that along the more modern version, let the modern version evolve organically, and also have a nostalgic sort of trip down memory lane. And I think that a lot of people have nostalgia for a lot of older Yu-Gi-Oh formats too, because like Yu-Gi-Oh just constantly built on itself, so you can see the shadows of older decks in the modern day, and it can be sometimes fun to go back and see what those decks were like back then if you play them in the modern day.
Yeah, because I think there's always the issue of introducing new people into Yu-Gi-Oh and them being overwhelmed. Like I think having a game that has like a time wizard option to kind of take you back and I mentioned this like early on in the stream, but have like a dual monsters era and a GX era where they have like you go there and it has maybe even just like a selection of lists and card pools in there would at least give people some variety in like in eras that they grew up playing and really enjoy. Like, hey, I like I kind of like the contemporary stuff. I don't really know much about these. I want to check out the Zexal era. What do we have here? Oh, it's like Tengu playing Dino Rabbit, Fire Water, Dragon Rulers, whatever. Like, I think that would be at least a good way to for people to ease into the game to learn new mechanics and also experience ways the game was played at a different point in time. I think there's a lot of benefits to that. Must says, the thing about Magic the Gathering is that nobody really even plays the format with set rotation. The eternal formats are far more popular.
Yeah, well, I will say that like I that is definitely true, but there are a fair amount of people who are like kind of upset with the direction the game has gone towards, like catering towards Commander and things like that, to an extent. But but I think you are right, and like a good reason for that is that people like that sense of continuity and feeling like, okay, this builds on something that was around when I first got into the game, and it builds on something. Maybe you're newer to the game, but you're like, you know, I want to feel a connection to the people playing the game a long time ago, and you can still have that by playing the eternal formats.
Yeah, I look back at some wrestling games, or like wrestling video games, and a lot of them has like older wrestlers you can play as, right? You can play as 1998 Steve Austin and 2002 Steve Austin, or 2006 John Cena and 2010 John Cena and 2012 John Cena, and like all these like things, and they have like these story modes where it has like, oh, it's the history of WrestleMania, or it's the Attitude Era and stuff like that. And these are games that celebrate the history that it has, on top of including the modern roster, including all these fun game modes. You got like your TLC match and Hell in a Cell and Survivor Series, and like they added War Games last year. And I think if you look at that and translate that to a Yu-Gi-Oh game, I think that's like it makes sense, right? You have something that continues and evolves the current state of the game while still celebrating what it was before, because that's still there. It didn't just poof disappeared. Like, people still have a love and appreciation for that, and if you can tap into that, then you can market that and sell that to people, being like, hey, you want to play this new Yu-Gi-Oh game? We got this cool new stuff. Because a lot of it ultimately comes down to money related reasons. And if you can get people who want to buy this stuff while still primarily catering to the modern audience, and I say go for it.
Yeah, and that balance is the hard one to strike, I think. Which is why Konami has just chosen not to. I think because like
Yeah.
I mean they have to. Well, then again, like Konami just seems like they not really care too much about the TCG. I mean that's just the general consensus. They don't really care about people in the West and stuff. And I like there is definitely a retro scene in Japan as well, with the
Mm-hmm.
OCG there. But like if we're talking about time blizzard events happening in the TCG and beyond, like I don't think they necessarily care enough to make things for that specifically, which is unfortunate. Hopefully that changes in the future because there's got to be people there who see the value of the untapped market that they have with like all the nostalgia. Because you look at the card releases, they release old sets, or not old sets, but like well they did actually release old sets recently. But if you release a new version of Dark Magician or Blue Eyes, that will sell. Like people
Yeah.
will buy that. And so just like tapping into that market more, but like making it less of just like here's a new collectible card that you can get, and more like here's a new collectible game mode that you can get and play the game right as you once did. I feel like it's a no brainer, but
I mean, I
um,
I really enjoy like the modern stuff, like as it is, right? Like, I like that you have, ban cards aside, you can play every card that's like in that's not currently banned. So if you want to make like a Dark Magician deck or Flame Swordsman deck, you can. And I really like that, and I like how like the video games, keep updating cards. Like, my whole thing really is just like, give me the option, like, hey, if I want to play this older stuff, at least let me play the older stuff, really. Like, I have no issues playing the modern stuff too, but
yeah, I mean
yeah.
it sort of reminds me of like if you think about some of the greatest games um, of all time, a lot of them are ones that you can like basically keep playing for a long time. There's just so much content, so much
Mhm.
bang for your buck, right? And I feel like just adding more bang for the buck would just make the game better and would make more people want to play it and buy it. And also, I do think like there's the idea of like, I always push this when I am encouraging people to try out other formats. I'm like, if you ever get tired of either modern or like, let's say Goat or Edison, right? Try out a different format because you're still playing the same sort of game that you like at least at one point enjoyed, but you're playing in a different context. And playing in that different context can really allow you to, refresh yourself, enjoy that new context, but then go back to the older context and enjoy that even more, right? Because you could be like, well, I'm in the mood to play Modern today, or I'm in the mood to play Edison today, right? And you
Hmm.
have these options to keep playing the game, which is what Konami would want you to do, right? They want you to keep playing. But at the same time, you have less of an ability to burn out on it, right?
I think what we need is a Fortnite mode.
Oh, yeah. Let's get Yu-Gi-Oh! And Fortnite.
Honestly,
It's got to be inevitable, you know?
like I was really sad that when we got Jump Force, we got Yugi in it, which was like really sick, right? Yugi in a fighting game, and we would get Kaiba as DLC too. I was kind of hoping we get like Merrick or something, but just I was just really sad that we did not get an interaction between Yugi and Jotaro from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, asking him if Dark Magician was a stand. I'm just
Oh, that would
I'm
have
I'm,
been, yeah, that
I'm
would have
sad
been
we didn't get
cool.
that. I mean, that also kind of leads to another idea. Like, what if it wasn't like a card game based video game, right? Like, what if it was something like it was a Duels of the Roses? That was like a weird RPG thing, or like Capsule
Yeah.
Monsters, or if you got like a Yu-Gi-Oh fighting game, right? Like a Pokken tournament kind of thing.
I mean, those would be cool, but the issue with all those is that, like, if you ever release one nowadays, you have to already have, like, a great Yu-Gi-Oh game that does just Yu-Gi-Oh on its own,
Mm,
or else people will be like, "Why'd you spend the time making that when you could have made like a good Yu-Gi-Oh like game where I can play the card game Yu-Gi-Oh?"
mm.
Right? Um,
But we got
but it
Master
is
Duel.
always very curious. Yeah, there's Master Duel, but some people might be like, "No, I want a TCG version or something." But yeah, I mean, honestly, now that they've got Master Duel, as like they could potentially try and make those, but I do think it would be met with a bunch of backlash because they're like, you haven't perfected Master Duel enough. You need to focus more stuff on that, or you need to do things more related to Yu-Gi-Oh itself.
Honestly,
Um,
I think one of the biggest missed opportunities was Konami not making a 3D Dungeon Dice Monsters game because we only got
mm.
one for the Game Boy Advance, and I really thought we should have got one for GameCube, PS2, Xbox era too, because that would have been way more fun. It's really a shame that we like it was a very small window to get to that chance, and we missed it, and I'm very sad. And if there's any way we can bring back like Dungeon Dice monsters and like capsule monsters and these alternate games that were in uh the original Yuga manga, that would be great. Like I think of something like there was a Japanese exclusive JoJo's Bizarre Adventure game on the PS2. It was Golden Wind, and that it was each it was a stage based game, right? Each stage you fought one of the villains of the week, and they had these very specific not as requirements, but like specific things that you could do that would gain you more like score points. That was kind of like in relation to like what actually happened in the manga, and I always thought that was like really fascinating that they it seemed to be like a really good balance of the action of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but also the puzzle solving elements that the action also uses in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which, funnily enough, is kind of how Yu-Gi-Oh as a manga work also kind of treats itself too, right? It is a it's a shonen, right? It's a battle manga. That's why Duel's Kingdom was so weird because it wasn't like, oh, here's like a legit card game. It was here's a card game as a medium for fighting. And I think that could be a really interesting way to go about it is to have like a stage basing where you have to solve essentially puzzles, but like all really fascinating kind of unique ways only Yu-Gi-Oh can muster. I think that would be really fascinating if Konami ever tries to, you know, try something
well,
slightly different, God forbid.
I will say, I know we sort of dunked on Legacy of the Duelist earlier, but it's different levels were kind of like that, where it was like, here's the deck that they were using, like from this duel in the anime, right? And you have to basically play this deck against the opponent's deck, which is also mirroring what they played
Hmm.
in the anime. and you've got to win with that. So it's sort of like setting up that sort of puzzle where it's
My
like,
well, I was gonna say my counterpoint to that is that like one, they give you the option to play like the gimmick deck or just play like your own deck, which I feel like that kind of like defeats the point of it. Um, but like
the option's
my
there, you
yeah,
know.
the option is there, but like my gripe with it, which my gripe with it kind of leads into me actually liking that we have the option is that it felt like for me anyway, it got old kind of fast. Like there was a lot of decks that's like, oh, this is just I'm just playing an ass deck. Like some of these,
Yeah,
like you're playing like Heart of the Underdog, Exodia, or some really crappy Battle Guard deck, and it's like
and that's the puzzle,
I'm
right?
just playing bad cards. Like it's different than I feel like it's different than like a dual puzzle. It's more of because there's so much luck element in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? So a lot of these times you get dealt this not only a bad hand, but it's a bad hand and a bad deck, and your opponent can draw a good hand and a good deck, and it's just like it's not even fair at
Well,
that point. Like it's I feel like there's definitely a random factor that does not lean in your favor.
yeah, there is that, but like I do think overall it was still the best way that you could approach it because
Hmm.
as you say, there is the option to bring your own deck, and that also kind of fits into it where it's like, well, how would you have done if you were in their shoes with your own deck, facing down this enemy duelist and stuff. So you get that option too. But as someone who actually went through the entirety of Legacy of the Duelist and the expansion too with the Link era and
Hmm.
stuff, and beat every single duel and every single reverse duel where you play as the villains with the story provided decks. I will say that there was only really like one duel that gave me trouble. You could definitely do it like within the course of a couple games with pretty much every deck that they gave you. Um, the
Which
only one that
which
yeah,
was it?
the only one that gave me trouble was it was from Brains. It was from Soul Burner versus I forget it was one of the AIs. I think the Wind AI. And you were playing Dragoonity.
Salamandrates.
Yeah, it was Dragoonity versus Salamangreat. And the Salamangreat deck is just so good that like the Dragoonity deck it was like you both had to get like a God Hand to Dragoonity and the like AI had
Hmm.
to brick. And it was so
Ugh,
tough to actually
that's
do.
that's rough. Salmagrate, I think, is the last meta deck I built back in like I think it was 2019 or so. Yeah, they're when they freaking hit Mirage Stalio, man. That
Mm.
was Shadow of the Moon 87. What's up? What I loved about the older GBA games was that you were a nameless character and it felt more like an RPG than games like Master Duel and Dueling Suit. To me, the 2009 to 2011 were the best games. Shout out to both of you guys. You are awesome and the front runners in the history of Yukio. Smiley face. And also, Mr. Vavoda, what's up? Thank you for the reasonable take on Legacy of the Duelist story decks. I'm so tired of people dunking on them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, no, I mean I think it is just like it's like I really like that they gave you the option. That's the thing. As long as there's the option to do your own thing in addition to the story decks, I think having the story decks there is great, right? Because like you don't want people to get frustrated with a given thing, right? Where it's just like, oh, this is like impossible and stuff. I can't beat this unless I bring in my own deck, but it's not allowing me to, right? And that would get people like really fed up with the story decks potentially. But the fact that like you have the option to potentially bring your own deck if it's just too tough for you, makes the story decks, in my opinion, really fun because like they are a challenge. The challenge is there if you want to go for it. Um, but if you don't, it doesn't ruin your gameplay experience.
Yeah, because I will say, as much as I've kind of dunked on them myself, that was the kind of thing that made me interested about that story mode. Was just being like, oh, I can play like pre-made decks instead of just like let go back to Eternal Duel Soul, where you start with just like a really crappy deck and have to work your way up through progressively more villainous opponents. Like I think it's definitely an interesting way to go about it. I kind of wish that they were built somewhere more in the middle, right? Between like just full on gimmicky and a little bit more competent. Because I think that would be a way I would go about it, just to make you kind of feel like you're learning the game a little bit, learning the deck a little bit more than just being like, oh, this is just a wholly uh, gimmick. Oh, I didn't catch you dunking on them, but yeah, I feel they gave a very rewarding experience in the game. But yeah, when you finally win, you're like, oh, thank God I drew into Exodia.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I will say I like beating Soulburner with the Dragoonity deck. That definitely was an achievement. Like that is I was like, "Yes, let's go." Like it was probably the uh like most exhilarating rush I got from playing that game was winning that game.
yeah, I think I have. I don't know if it's unlisted or not on my channel. It was like the only video I kept from like my pre Yu-Gi-Oh days was a highlight from that Legacy of the Duel stream where I think I lost to, I want to say it was the Rare Hunter or Seeker or whatever he's called in the game, with a turn one, like first turn, like turn zero really, Exodia.
Oh wow.
And it's like, I can't win, I guess. Can't even play the game.
Yep.
Like, it definitely feels, like if that's what you're looking for is that anime experience, definitely gives you that when you're like, oh god, this guy has a bunch of pieces of Exodia. Crap, what do I do?
Yeah, and I mean that's the experience that I'm looking for if I'm looking for a story duel ripped out of the anime. Um, I think that honestly that is probably the best if you're going for a situation that simulates the anime itself. I do think that as we discussed earlier, there needs to be better connections in between those duels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like just having random cutscenes that the cutscenes were kind of just thrown together. They're not really like the best thing in the world for tying them together. Like it's kind of underwhelming there. But like I think if they like connected them more, maybe added some more games from the
Mm-hmm.
animes or mangas, I think that it would be like a top tier game for sure, and a game that a lot of people would get because there are a lot of people who are invested in the franchise, not necessarily because of the competitive state of the game, but because of the anime and the manga and the games therein. And so being able to experience that in a bit of a better package, I think would be definitely a moneymaker.
Yeah, it's really tough when you have so many eras of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? There's like what, like eight of them, something crazy if you include like
Yeah, Go Rush
Rush
is
Duel.
the last one.
Um and so like when you're making a game, it's like, well, what do you do with like the in between stuff? Because I meant, I was mentioning earlier with like the Duel Monsters era, full 3D, full arcs things, but like how feasible is that with every single era of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? If you like, you got to do like every arc, everything is like, you got to specify things, but if you specify things like Battle City and Society of
Give
Light
us every
and whatever, like then you're gonna skip out on things. So like it feels like there's so much Yu-Gi-Oh that you're gonna miss out on stuff. Like
Look, I
Pokemon.
won't complain about more content. Give me the filler duels. Give me give me just the random like duels that people don't care about because I will play them, and it's like worst case scenario it's like one extra game that you have to play over the course of the longer thing. So,
did
and like I feel like yeah.
did Legacy of the Duelist add the Orichalcos arc?
Oh, I don't remember. Okay. You know what I'm going to do? Or actually, I think I might have
Cause,
uninstalled it from
cause I'm, cause
Steam,
I'm
but
thinking like, I assume if they did that right, they would all the cards in the game would be like legit cards. Cause like I wonder if they would add stuff in these games that weren't real
I forget
cards.
if they did. I'm pulling up Steam now. I might have
Like
uninstalled it
I
unfortunately, but
don't know, cause
uh,
like I mean, there's some Yu-Gi-Oh games, right? Like, um, like the sacred cards and stuff that adds like new cards, like ritual cards, right? They're different than spell cards.
yeah, I
So,
think they added some DLCs at one point. Yeah, they add some DLCs. Yeah, they did add the Waking the Dragon stuff
because I know
in
some
DLC
characters,
form,
like I
but
believe the character was it Valor, like they don't
yeah,
have those
they
cards
added
in the
them.
game. So like, what
I
do you
think
give characters that don't have?
I think they just gave them like random decks, honestly. Um I forget exactly what they gave, but they did have the duels there. Um I definitely like there were DLCs for them. I think the bigger like Link Evolution stuff that also had it as well, just built into it.
Okay, so I just looked it up. Valen in Legacy of the Duelist, he has two decks. One is a desk bot deck, and the other is a Psy-frame deck.
Yeah, they just went like with weird picks for them.
I mean, I guess it's fits like if you don't have what he actually has, yeah, but I also feel like that's kind of a missed opportunity, right? Like to play against a character that has these like anime cards that you wouldn't actually get in the TCG, like give you like a really unique experience of things that like you cannot experience otherwise.
Yeah, and also like if you're worried about like the balance, I feel like if someone has like a broken anime card in their deck, that just makes it like a challenge game, right? Like, and
Hmm.
if it's like a video game that you're playing, you don't really care about your opponent having like a busted card as much because like it's not like there's another person who's going yeah yeah I got this card you don't, right?
Hmm.
It's just like a hard boss, as um someone in the chat mentioned earlier, like it could be like a Souls like game with that sort of thing where you have to overcome that boss who has the broken anime card with just your own more fair and balanced deck.
Yeah, like what would feel more satisfying, right? Beating Pegasus with like the crappy toon monsters, or beating Pegasus with some busted toon like straight from the anime kind of thing, where like you cannot kill these things.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's a missed opportunity honestly, and hopefully they sort of do it at some point. I mean, I guess now they're in like the Rush Duels era of the anime, so maybe they just don't really care about going back to the anime for like the normal card game. But I
Because
think you
I
could do a
think
game.
because like, I think it'd be so fun, right, to play like a GX thing where you play as Jaden, but you get like an unlimited fusion deck.
Yeah,
Like
and
that
like all those
sounds
fusions available.
yeah, like that sounds
There-
so fun to me. And Buki says Forbidden Memories, you get out of here. Right? It's a perfect in terms of music
oh,
and atmosphere. I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
yeah,
K
I
twenty
don't want
three.
to.
Oh, real quick. K23 USA says if you want to see more anime cards and anime like format, you should check out the Dynamis Duel Project. I'll have to check that out.
Oh, yeah, very cool. Yeah, and honestly, like we mentioned earlier, like if we ever want to get our ideal game, it would probably be a fan made thing, right? Because the fans are not in it for the money. The fans are in it for the passion, right? And they're doing things that, people want to do because they are part of those people who want to play that sort of game. So, um, yeah, no, I mean, that would be a very, very cool thing if there's something like that
Hmm.
there. Um,
Dynamis Duel, a fan-made Yu-Gi-Oh reboot with over 1,000 redesigned cards from the original game. Specifically created with slower gameplay to mimic exciting duels from the anime. All cards work together for draft or sealed play. Support for multiplayer duels. That seems kind of fun.
yeah, that's
Uh,
pretty cool.
Buki, Lamau, I mean the bosses with broken cards. Haishin and Dark Knight has some nasty stuff. Oh yeah, like have a Forbidden Memories mode where your opponent just plays perfectly Ultimate Great Moth and Gate Guardian and all these
Yeah, and you're just
absurd
on Twin Headed Thunder Dragon. Like, how do I beat this?
like
I
give
mean, that I think,
yeah,
like, I think
I think
Forbidden Memories is a.
Master Duel should add a Forbidden Memories mode.
I agree. Yeah, get that horoscope in there. But I do think that like people still play Forbidden Memories to this day, partially because it's a very challenging game, and those sorts of challenging bosses hold an lure for people as they try and beat them, speed run the game, do a variety of things with the game. So
Yeah, it I have issues with Forbidden Memories, but I mean
but yeah, I mean, I
I
don't think
can't
it's
see too much. I use their music like all the time, clearly.
yeah.
I mean
But
Free
it's not the
Battle,
game for me personally, but it's definitely a game that people return to for a reason. Where people aren't
honestly,
returning to like do you see people playing much Joey the Passion or like Tribe of the Chaos or something, you know, the Power of Chaos or whatever, like those old computer games where it was fun. Like I grew up on Joey the Passion, playing that, but there's not really that thing that you have to like overcome or surmount, right? It's just like once you beat it, like after that, there are better games to play, right?
I mean, Buki has the perfect comment here. I love Forbidden Memories. I wish it was good. I mean, honestly,
I
like I would argue like probably one of the most important things, like graphics has always kind of been like like whatever people have figure out how to play Yu-Gi-Oh, like, enjoy the games with that. But like the music though, like you get some good
mm,
music in a Yu-Gi-Oh game, like something you can actually just like chill out and play against, which I think has been like the most consistent thing across all the Yu-Gi-Oh games, whether it is like Forbidden Memories, Eternal Duel Soul, Nightmare Troubadour, Master Duel, um, the Dual Trancer, like Spirit Caller, like all these games, phenomenal music. Love it.
and if you have good video game music, that's basically another advertisement for your game, right? Think about all the like video essays that are like, I'm using this track from this video game now. And people are like, oh, I like that track. I want to check out that video game now. Um,
All of my
and
videos, like they all, for the most part anyway, they all use Yu-Gi-Oh music.
mm, yeah, my videos are all just the John Cage music. I think it's like 4 minutes 33 seconds or something. It's just looped over and over again.
Wait,
It's just the
do you
composition where
use
it's just
music?
silent. It's just
Oh,
silence. Yeah, but
but
yeah, no. I mean,
I'm like,
powerful
wait a
music.
minute, did you use
Yeah,
music? I'm like,
no.
oh no, I done got.
Yeah. If I'd remembered the actual name of the composition, it would have been a lot better. um, but yeah, I mean, music is definitely it eases people into the game. It makes it so that even if they're at a hard point, they still keep playing because they're like, well, this music at least is guiding me through it.
Which kind of
So
made
very
me
very
think
important.
of like when I was playing through Eternal Duel Soul. Like I think the one thing I really wanted that game to have was just uh, customization for the music and the backgrounds. Because like you give me customization for like backgrounds, like animations and colors and card sleeves and music, like that opens up a whole new world of things. Like imagine if Dueling Book had like its own sort of Dueling Book radio that they like got composers to make music for,
That'd be
right?
really cool. Luckily, people have made custom things for Dueling Book for like the backgrounds and things like that that you can
Yeah, you
port in, which is
can
very nice. Yeah.
yeah, there's like tutorials on like YouTube about that stuff, which is like really cool. But to
Yeah,
have
I
like stuff
would
like built
honestly
in
use
aside
that.
from card sleeves, I think like they got to jump on that.
Yeah, well, the reason I don't use it in my videos is because I'm like, whenever I see that in people's videos, I'm like, oh, that's really cool, but it also like it makes it seem like they're doing things that I can't do as much, right? Where
Hmm.
before I knew about it, at least, I'm like, oh, they're using this whole thing, like that must be a special like custom made program that I've never encountered before. Like I can't quite do as what they're doing there. So I just like keep my Dueling Book on the basic settings, so that way you'll see, oh, it is Dueling Book. They're doing that. There's like someone playing Dueling Book, like I might be, even if I don't know how to customize the backgrounds and stuff. So um,
Yeah, I just
I
use
mean,
default because I'm boring
yeah, I mean, and
and
also
lazy.
it's not like if people don't like the customization that I go for, that can turn people away from it. Where like no one's gonna get turned away. Well, if you get turned away by the basic Dueling Book background, you're probably not playing on Dueling Book anyways. So,
Hmm.
um, but I feel like less people probably get turned away by that. But yeah, it's always cool to see what people do use. Like, I really like JDT's customization in their videos on the Goat format channel with the different like thinking and like yes or no
Oh yeah,
responses as well. That's pretty cool.
that
And
stuff is
I
so
know,
fun.
yeah, and it's just cool seeing what different people use.
Yeah, K23 USA says it's a shame that all new card games are focused on in-game purchases for constant revenue streams. I'm afraid that this is really preventing more RPG like you games like we used to get. I mean, yeah, I think live service is more of a curse for a lot of games that don't need it, or it is a representation of just how blind these like studio heads are, or maybe more of like the publisher side of things, like Kill a Justice League is probably
Yep,
a big example of making something that no one wanted to do. Like no one wanted, like the Rocksteady didn't want to make it, the fans didn't want it. It makes no sense. When it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, I understand it just because it is a constantly evolving game, like physically, which feeds into digitally, and it's like the game is free, right? Like they're not even charging like $70 for. Like it's like Fortnite does like the same thing, and it's like one of like the most popular games like in the world. And with Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like you don't technically have to, but like you can. Um, and if it's a way to help support the game that has been doing a lot of good for the Yu-Gi-Oh brand, I'm all for it personally. Zach Running and Cheese, what's up? Say true. I love Duel Links in 2017. The live service model has evolved it into a game I no longer love. And yeah, and that can be like again, it's a very um. I just had the word in my head.
Tricky,
What's what? No, like
off
I mean it.
balance, or
No, it's it can be it can just be very particular on
mm,
like it can be rather fragile of having it be too much but having be like a reasonable degree, like given the nature of the game and how it works. So like, what do you just keep adding more and more cards forever? Like, if you're adding new cards and like people are gonna buy it, then have people buy it. I mean, it's kind of shitty to say that, but like it's true, and that's just the truth of the matter.
yeah. I will also say, like, I remember revisiting older games. Like, I've revisited like Dual Transer, and seeing cards that maybe came out at the tail end of that game's card pool, like the Nordic monsters. You do have some of those in there, but you don't get the full package that you get later, um, and that makes the deck feel kind of incomplete. And I generally don't like judging retro formats on that sort of thing. I do think for games, like video games that are supposed to be like one all-encompassing thing, it can be a bit annoying to see the first wave of support for this sort of thing, but not see the rest. Maybe not Nordics, but I think there was some other archetype that had it that way. The Nordics came out like all in the same set, so but there was something like that where it was just frustrating,
Mm-hmm.
or not frustrating, but like kind of disappointing to not have the full power archetype. Um, and I think it's just like something where if you have a video game, while it is unfortunate that like the sort of evolving state of the game can shift it away from something that you once enjoyed, I think it does. It's ultimately like kind of a necessity for that sort of thing.
Yeah, you say there are a couple of Yu-Gi-Oh fan games currently in the works. The community picking up Konami slack just like they did with Pokemon. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna get like a Power World Yu-Gi-Oh anytime soon. Uh, but
Yu-Gi-Oh
like
monsters with weapons.
it's Karibo with a gun.
Yeah.
But like as big as like Dueling Book is, I mean, like the majority like they're gonna play Master Duel, right? Like that's like where everyone goes to. It's the most competitive and popular simulator there. And whether it's you got to pay money for certain cards or not, like that's just where the competitive, that's what Konami is pushing. And like so many people use the game, like all the upkeep and all the people behind the scenes that have to like constantly work on the game and create these things. And like it's like it's so much that like again, it's a free game. Like if you need to pay for certain things, it goes into the Konami as a whole that helps support the game, can help support other releases and other endeavors, and have what you say about Konami as a company and all the stuff that they deal with over the years. You know, I would love for everything to be free, but like I think it would be a little bit naive to expect otherwise at this point.
Yeah, and I'm just really grateful that they haven't shut down free simulators like Dueling Book or Edo Pro or Omega, because I really do think that like this is why we use like Dueling Book and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that for playing retro formats, because it does have the capability to do that, and also all the cards are available, so people aren't just like priced out of the game if they want to play something that is already a small enough format, right? Because like how many people really play all these formats outside like Goat and Edison? Not too big of a group. So I do think that having these fan-made simulators that are free is really nice and can make it so that, like, Master Duel being what it
Mhm.
is more palatable. Not that, I'm saying Master Duel's economy is bad because, as I said earlier in the stream, I do think that Master Duel's economy to how to do card game economy right with, like, how it lets you grind or pay, depending on what you wanna do to get the decks, and being able to do that for a lot of different things, a lot of different
Also,
decks that you wanna do.
rest in peace, Dueling Network. I I
Yeah.
remember hearing somewhere that Dueling Book like can basically get away with it. Like there's essentially like a loophole, I think, but I could be wrong, something like that. But Zach Wrench, you were talking. You said you're talking about solo campaign games, and I think if there was like a solo campaign game like I mentioned earlier, like a Duel Monsters era thing, I do think that it should not be there should not be a national dex, right? Like it should be a specific card pool. Maybe not just limited to just like what is contained in the store mode, but have a relatively healthy but select amount of cards. That I would like if you want to keep it into like a singular self-contained game. But I think most people just want like a really nice and customizable simulator. Really, I think that's just
Yeah.
like what most people would prefer of the Yu game. Even though I would like more of an adventure style thing.
If we do the solo campaign mode, I really want to do it with its like I'm not sure if you were in the stream when I mentioned this earlier, but I really want to do it where, it sort of starts with you as like a kid at like your local game store and this new game called Yu-Gi-Oh just come out. And so you're playing around with like the first release cards and you face different players playing with that same card pool and stuff. And then as time goes on, like they keep adding like you can go to the next era and the next era and so on and so forth as your character grows and other characters around them grow and stuff like that. And that would also probably make the rollout of the game a bit easier because you don't have to make the entire card pool at once or complicate interactions all at once. You just focus on the basic original stuff from the original card pool and then keep going from there. So that's what I want out of a solo mode, but
Like
that might be a bit bigger on the card pool
I'm
side of
not, I
things
think it
eventually.
could be fascinating, just like as an idea, like and a relatively like a small concept too. If someone wanted to make a game where like yeah, you do start off playing like LOB Legend of Blue Eyes just came out, and you work your way up, having to defeat a certain area of missions, and you work your way up to the 2003 World Championships with like Yada form, and that being like the climactic end of that. I think that would be really fascinating as
Yeah.
like a
And
fan made project.
yeah, I think it would also have the potential to get personal and stuff too, because a lot of fans like we all watched the anime, right? Like and saw Battle City tournament things like that. But when was there a tournament where it was like citywide and you were fighting on top of skyscrapers and stuff like that? Like, I feel like most people can relate to just going to your local game store and playing games with people, playing in locals, things like that. And so it can sort of capture like people's actual experience in it as well and turn it into a bit more of a personal video game. So that'd be cool as well.
Yeah, I mean there are like absolutely endless ways to like theorize a Yu-Gi-Oh game. I think it definitely usually kind of boils down to like having some sort of more anime experience or having a more pure TCG experience. I don't think Konami cares that much personally. I think they just see
Yeah.
dollar signs on the card game. And honestly, what we've gotten with Master Duel, I think is more than a lot of people were expecting anyway. Like when that launched, not even that long ago. It was this decade, right? Like the fact that we got that
Yeah.
and they're still supporting with all these things and people are still playing it, I think is just a really good sign for like the future of Yu-Gi-Oh video games. Even this is assuming that they make more Yu-Gi-Oh video games and not just end with this. But here's
Yeah, I
hoping.
mean with Master Duel, they might be like, well, we don't need to make more video games, so we're fine,
Yeah.
But yeah, if they do, it would be really cool to see. And I'm curious to see what they'd come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no developer. I don't know how to code or anything. Like I have friends who make games. One of them just came out last last week. Go check out Starstruck Vagabond. um, so like obviously it's not something I'm ever gonna do, but that could be really fun. Boo. I have made games before, like Zelda fan games, so I do have some experience in like fan developing something, but that's neither here nor there. Zachary says the biggest thing I'd love for Master Duel is a bandless editor for Duel Room. See, that's what I'm saying. Just give people the illusion of choice at the very least, right? Let them like create their own like custom forums, so to speak, like selecting card pools and or card pool cutoffs and adjusting your own list. So like you can like make a critter format. You can make Tengu Plan or whatever you feel like making, and those can have
Yeah,
like their
I
own
feel
sort of like clubs involved around them.
yeah, I feel like the ban list is less of an issue in those cases, and the bigger issue is in terms of like the rules and stuff. Because like if you
Yeah.
watch like for instance, some of the Master Duel draft series that have been going on where they play with goat cards in Master Duel rooms, you can still
Mm.
like jump into a Master Duel room with the goat cards and play. But if you have something like Sinister Serpent, right? Sinister Serpent is going to be able to come back to your hand like all the time with no drawback. It's playing with its errata effect, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like if you're just jumping into a room with a friend, you can just be like, okay, we're agreeing to not play these cards and stuff. But the actual mechanical problems of like not being able to use the cards that they were originally intended to be used makes things a bit different there.
Yeah, they would have to release like pre-errata versions for that, and I think that could be an interesting thing for certain. Like, it doesn't have to be like every card, right? Just like certain cards for popular formats. Like at the very least, the supported Time Wizard formats. I think I think would be nice, but that's just me. If Konami
Yeah.
supports Time Wizards in Master Duel, cards will likely have current rulings and modern priority. Do you think that would affect how retro formats are played? Oh yeah, like I don't think that's the way. Like if that's not how they play them in Time Wizard tournament, like Time Wizard side events, I I honestly can't see them adding them in Master Duel if they're not gonna also change that. You know,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the event, the GOAT event, that Master Duel had, right? It was an OCG version of GOAT, to be sure, but you could see in Master Duel that they weren't like, okay, let's change Sinister Serpent to back how it originally worked there, right? For that event, Sinister Serpent still worked the way it does in Modern, right? And so they didn't change it like in Master Duel itself when they did the GOAT format thing. So I don't think that they would put in the effort to like actually change them if they did officially support them. They'd
mhm.
just be like, well, tough luck. Master Duel's already not really a good analog of the TCG or OCG. So our version of the retro formats are also not going to be the perfect one-to-one matching of that.
Although to be
Necessarily based on card
fair,
pools. But, yeah.
some actually might like that, right? One where
Yeah,
Ring of
and
Destruction and Sinister Serpent are heavily nerfed. Sangan's heavily nerfed. Some people might
yeah,
like that. I don't know. It's their own modified goats.
yeah. And again, people like how Master Duel is. They don't want it to be the TCG or the OCG. They just like it add this sort of merged conglomeration, and people can enjoy playing the game in multiple different ways. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think as long as we have they keep making video games and they keep giving us like different ways to experience Yu-Gi-Oh. I think that's ultimately the most important thing. I feel like they've definitely slowed down on it, but I mean, who's to say that they don't announce something in this year or in a couple of years, which for my sake, I hope so. I think it would be a shame if they just kind of made Master Duel and stopped at that. Because like even Legacy of the Duelist was like, wasn't that like technically like a had like a re-release? Wasn't that this whole thing
Yeah,
on the
they
Switch?
re-released they really released the Link version. They did
Yeah,
a bunch of DLCs, and then when the Link era came, they're like, okay, we're just gonna release a completely new expansion for this.
which also had
Um,
DLC, right?
I don't know if that one did. I don't know. If it did have DLC, I think I bought it when it was like
Le-
already included,
Legacy of the
but it did
Duelist, Link
include the original.
Evolution. I think,
Yeah, the Link Evolution
yeah,
one.
I don't want to say, but I feel like it had like additional discs, but I could be wrong with that.
It might have,
But
but
it is
I did
time to
not get to
wrap
test it.
this discussion up. We're getting to the end of the stream here. I guess any last thoughts on the Yu-Gi-Oh video games scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got pretty good TCG simulators. Yeah, Match Duel isn't really a TCG simulator, but it's an automated sim that people can play the game relatively. Even if it's not like our ideal versions of it, it's still out there. Dueling Looks out there, Edo Pro's out there. There are some things for it, and I think we're very lucky to be in a community where those sorts of resources exist. Um, but things can always get better. So it'd be really cool to see things like the solo campaign games that you were talking about. That'd be awesome. They continue making that, and we hope that Konami will potentially put those out. But if not, as people mentioned, there are plenty of fan games coming out that can hopefully fill that void as well. So, um, we might have complained a bit over the course of this podcast episode, but there is still a lot to appreciate and love, and it just shows how great this community can be.
Absolutely. And without regurgitating like my own like thoughts on like the whole matter, I do think it's interesting how I believe was it Switch Online was adding some of like the like old like Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh games. So I think it'd be cool at the very least if Konami at some point re-releases like a set of like some of the older games just to experience them on like modern hardware like Forbidden Memories, Eternal Duel Souls, Sacred Cards, Nightmare Troubadour, Spirit Caller, just like all this kind of because that could technically be another way to go about this whole alternate format via video games kind of thing. Um, but if anyone's watching this in the Vaz, I'll let you kind of continue that discussion onto there. So with that said, I think the stream's just about done. So thank you all for watching. We'll see you all next week, probably.
Yeah. See you then.